Shavua. Rabbi Jacobson, please.
Good evening. This week we're going to explore an idea of the Rogatchover Gon on the Parshas HaShavua on Parshas Va'era. Just a few introductory words about the person whose idea we're going to be discussing this evening.
Muting, cancel.
His name was Rabbi Yossi Jacobson. He was born in the city of Rogatchov, and hence he came to be known as the Rogatchover Gon, which means the genius of Rogatchov. Rabbi Yossi Jacobson ultimately became the rabbi of the city of Dvinsk, one of the two rabbis, the Hasidic rabbi of the city of Dvinsk, and is known also by the title of his Sfarim, of his books, Tzofnas Paneach, the revealer of secrets. And in the set of Tzofnas Paneach on Chumash, on the Torah, he has an insight, an idea in this week's Parsha that I want to explore with you this evening. The Rogatchover, the Tzofnas Paneach, quotes the Pasuk in Parshas Va'era. Hashem once again sends Moshe Rabbeinu on a mission to talk to the Jewish people and promise them redemption. And when Moshe comes and speaks to the Jews, the Torah says, V'lo shamu al Moshe. They did not listen to Moshe, mikaitze ruach, from short breath, or me'avoda kasha, and from the difficult, excruciating toil. They could not listen to him. And then the Torah says, Hashem speaks to Moshe, go to Paroi and instruct him to send the Jewish people from his land to grant them liberty. And Moshe tells Hashem, Hein b'nei Yisrael lo yishamu elai, the children of Israel have not listened to me. Ve'eich yishme'eni Paroi. How will Paroi, how can I expect Paroi to respond to me? So Hashem tells Moshe and Aaron in the next verse, Vayidaber Hashem el Moshe ve'el Aaron vayitzavim el bnei Yisrael. He commands them to the children of Israel. Ve'el Paroi melech Mitzrayim, and to Paroi the king of Egypt, lohaitzi es bnei Yisrael meretz Mitzrayim, to take the children of Israel out of Egypt. This verse, this pasuk, is somewhat enigmatic. Hashem speaks to Moshe and Aaron, and he commands them to the Jewish people. What does he command them? Does he command them to tell something to the Jewish people? Does he command them something concerning the Jewish people? Does he give them a command that they have to fulfill about the Jewish people? The pasuk is ambiguous. Vayitzavim al bnei Yisrael. He instructed them to the Jewish people to do what? To speak to them, or not to speak to them, just to do something within themselves. And then the pasuk says, and he also told them, he instructed them to Paroi the king of Egypt. But there it says clearly, Lahaitzi es bnei Yisrael meretz Mitzrayim, to take the Jewish people out of Egypt. So we understand that he told them to tell Paroi to expel, to liberate, to set free the Jewish people from Egypt. But what did he tell them what did he command them to the Jews? Vayitzavim el bnei Yisrael. All the commentators struggle with this. Each of them has to present another meaning, or a meaning to these words. Rashi gives us his interpretation. Other commentators give their interpretation. The Rogatchover quotes a Talmud Yerushalmi. In the Jerusalem Talmud, the Talmud that was authored in the Holy Land in Eretz Yisrael, in Masechta Rosh Hashanah, the Gemara, the Talmud Yerushalmi, Rosh Hashanah, Perek Gimel Halacha Hey, says that Hashem gave Moshe a particular mitzvah, one of the first commandments, perhaps the first, to present to the Jewish people in Egypt before any other mitzvah. Most other mitzvahs would of course be given to the Jewish people later when the Torah is given at Sinai and in the subsequent 40 years. Some mitzvahs would be given in a place called Mara, en route from Egypt to Sinai, to Mount Sinai. But here was a mitzvah, a commandment that was given to the Jewish people before liberation, before the plagues. Before the first plague, Vayitzavim al bnei Yisrael, he gave them a mitzvah to give the Jewish people. And then the pasuk continues. And also al pari melech Mitzrayim, and to Pari the king of Egypt, lahoitzias b'nei Yisrael me'eretz Mitzrayim, to take the Jewish people out of Egypt. Both commandments, the commandment he gave them to communicate to the Jewish people, and the commandment they needed to communicate to Pari, had the same goal, to liberate the Jewish people from Egypt. What was this mitzvah, we ask? I understand the mitzvah that they had to give Pari. They had to tell Pari, do a mitzvah, do what God is telling you to do, liberate his children from Egypt. A clear mitzvah, a clear instruction and commandment, which Pari, as we know, will disobey, and the rest is history. What was the mitzvah that the Jewish people needed to do? So the Talmud Yerushalmi says, Al Matzivam, what was the mitzvah? Parshas Shiluach Avodim. At that moment, Moshe and Aaron gave over to the Jews the mitzvah of liberating their own servants, their own slaves. Later in the Torah, in Parshas Mishpatim, in Parshas Bahar, in Parshas Re'eh, we will learn about the legislations concerning slaves, servants. And there we will learn about the mitzvah of liberating slaves, as we will discuss in a moment what that mitzvah consists of. So at this point, Moshe had to tell the Jewish people, there is a mitzvah from God to liberate slaves. Briefly, as the Torah will tell us later, if a Jew acquires a Jewish servant, an Eved Ivri, and I should really qualify what that means, acquiring an Eved Ivri, a Jewish slave. The Gemara says in Tractate Kiddushin, and the Rambam brings it in Hilchos Avadim, Maimonides brings it in the Laws of Servants, if you acquire a Jewish servant, you are acquiring a master. Don't think you're purchasing a servant, you're purchasing a master. Not only because he's Jewish, but because legislation of halacha requires you to treat him so. You can't say, I'm going to eat beef, and he will eat the leftover food. If you have one pillow, you must give it to your servant. If you have one meal, you must give it to your servant. In other words, the servant must be treated with utmost dignity and respect, but you have acquired him, and there's a limit, 6 years. 6 years is the maximum. After 6 years, he goes free. There is one more, however, case in which he goes free, and that is what we call Yovel, Jubilee. Each 50 years, the Jewish nation celebrated what's called a Jubilee year. The word Jubilee comes from the Hebrew Yovel. That year was the year in which all servants and slaves were liberated. No exception. Something else happened that year, and that is all farms and fields were liberated. They went back to their original owner. So if I sold you my field in the land of Israel, when it came the Jubilee year, the 50th year, and there was a count every 50 years, 7 sabbaticals, 7 times 7, 49. And then came a 50th year Jubilee year. This year, by the way, is a Shemitah year. It's a sabbatical year. The 7th year, 7 times 7 is 49, then is a Jubilee year. The fields, the farms would go back to their original owner. Now, the laws of Jubilee only applied, according to the Torah, during the time when most of the Jewish tribes lived in the land of Israel. Because then the Jewish nation was in its most spiritually and organically functional fashion, functional design. In other words, when the land of Israel was divided to different tribes, this wasn't a random division. There was an organic connection between each tribe and the soil of Eretz Yisrael, the soil of the land of Israel, that it settled. So there is an organic connection between the owner of the field and the field. So the Jubilee years applied to that time when the Jewish people were living collectively in their homeland, in the Holy Land in Eretz Yisrael. This organic connection created a situation where in the Jubilee year everything went back to its original owner. Once the 10 tribes were exiled by the Assyrian king Sancheriv, and most of the community was not living in the land, even when they came back for the second commonwealth and built a second temple, the laws of the Jubilee did not apply. Hence, the laws of Jewish slaves also did not apply. That whole idea of acquiring a Jewish servant for 6 years or till the Jubilee year did not apply. But the point being is, a person buys a slave in the Torah. After 6 years, he must be set free. No if, but when, why he must be set free. Furthermore, if Jubilee is the second year, or the third year, the fourth year, he must be set free earlier than that or after that, whenever the year of Yovel is. There is one exception, and that is, if after 6 years the servant says, Ahavti es Adoini, I love my master, I don't want to leave. I love this place. I'm having a great time. I want to remain a slave. I want to remain a servant. Then the Torah is unhappy about it. His ear has to be pierced. But he could remain in the domain of this master till Yovel, till the Jubilee year, which means 50 years maximum. After 50 years, he too must be liberated. He too must be set free. Now, there are very, very strict conditions when you're allowed to purchase a servant, how you're allowed to purchase a servant, the enormous limitations, very, very rare circumstances. And thus, now we come back to the Talmud Yerushalmi. So the Gemara in Yerushalmi says, this was the mitzvah that Moshe gave over to the Jewish people. He told them the mitzvah of Shiluach Avodim, that they will have to liberate their slaves. Now, I want you to think about it for a moment, because this is a fascinating insight from our sages. The Jewish people are slaving away in a morally depraved society that is torturing them barbarically. The Jewish people are experiencing savage suffering. Children torn away from them. Families destroyed. Human beings reduced to beasts. Human beings stripped from all of their dignity, from all of their identity as people. They can't even listen to Moshe's promise of redemption. They're short of breath. They are totally consumed and overwhelmed by the pain and suffering that the emperor of Egypt, Pharaoh, has imposed upon them. At this moment, Moshe and Aaron come to the Jewish people and they give them a mitzvah. And what is this mitzvah? They talk to them about one day they will be masters. They will be free men. They will live in their own country. They will be able to be so successful that they can purchase a human being who is employed in their home and working for them full time and belongs to them. And at this time, Moshe tells them, remember, you have a mitzvah to set your servants free. Coupled with the mitzvah to Paro, the same verse. He commanded them to speak to the Jews. He commanded them to speak to Paro with one goal, to take them out of Egypt. According to the Rogatchover, this was a condition. You want to go out of Egypt, you must accept upon yourself this mitzvah. I will not liberate you from Egypt. I will not force Paro to set the Jewish people free if they do not accept upon themselves, prior to the liberation, a commitment that one day when they might have a servant, they will remember that he does not belong to them inherently and intrinsically and eternally. 6 years maximum. They must set their servants free as well. This is what the Gemara in Yerushalmi says. Comes the Rogatchover and takes it to a new level. He questions, first of all, the fact that the Torah reports to us twice, not once but twice, about the inability of the Jewish people to accept and embrace Moshe's mission of redemption. The first already at the end of Parshas Shmos. You remember when Paro gave out a new decree following Moshe's commitment to redemption. He comes to Paro and he says, let my people go. And Paro says, they're lazy, nirpim atem nirpim, and that's why you want to leave. Therefore we have to double and triple and quadruple the work. And Paro gives out a decree that from that day on, the quota of bricks must remain the same, but straw will not be provided to the Hebrew slaves. They must go and collect straw themselves. And when Moshe and Aaron leave Paro, the Torah says that the Jewish policemen met Moshe and they said, let God judge you, because as a result of you, our reputation has become so terrible in the eyes of Paro, in the eyes of their servants, he is giving them a sword just to murder us. Their words touch Moshe so deeply, he comes back to Hashem and he says, why are you doing this? Here again in Parshas Vayera, we learn that when Moshe comes to the Jewish people, they can't listen to him. Mikaitze ruach me'avodah kasha, they're working too hard. They don't trust what he's saying. They don't listen to what he's saying. They can't absorb what he's saying. So we have the event recorded twice. This is the first thing the Rogatchover discusses. Right after that, Moshe tells Hashem, the Jews are not listening to me. How can I expect Paroi to listen to me? What's the meaning of this Kal V'chomer as we know it? What's the logic? The Jews are not listening to me. How can I expect Paroi to listen to me? How could you compare? The Jews are not listening to you because they're overwhelmed. Because the work is excruciating. Because they can't breathe. They can't hear anything. Why should that prove that Paroi won't listen to me? Paroi may listen to you. You're speaking in the name of God. You're a prophet of God. You're giving him the warning of God. Paroi might very well listen to you. Just because the Jews won't listen to you, Paroi won't listen to you. It's two universes. These are the slaves. This is the king. What's the proof? And what's the response of Hashem? Hashem speaks to Moshe and Aaron and commands them to the Jewish people and to Paroi to take the Jews out of Egypt. What was the commandment to the Jewish people? That they should send slaves one day. They should liberate slaves. And to Paroi, that he should liberate his slaves. How do we understand the continuity of these verses? How do we understand the message? Here is the perspective of the Tzafnas Paneach. According to the Rogatchover, something occurred that was extremely dramatic when the Jewish people were in Egypt. Moshe Rabbeinu came to them with a message of Geula. He said, my dear brothers, your time of redemption has arrived. You will be set free. You will become an independent nation. What occurs after that? They believe him. He goes to Paroi, and the decree becomes even more harsh. Till then, the Egyptian forces provided the Jews with straw. From that day on, the Jews themselves have to assemble their own straw. Why did this happen? Says the Tzafnas Paneach a gewaldige Wort. He says, till that point, the Jewish people were avodim, they were slaves to Pharaoh in Egypt. But then came a point where when Moshe Rabbeinu approached them with the message of redemption, what he was hearing from them is those words that will be echoed in Parshas Mishpatim. Ahavti es Adoni, v'im omar yoymar ha'eved, ahavti es Adoni. If this servant will say and say again, I love my master, I don't want to leave. This is my place, this is my home, this is what I'm comfortable with. When the servant resigns to his condition, to his situation, and he's incapable of foreseeing for himself a greater life, a broader vision, a larger horizon. This is my place, I'm used to it, I'm accustomed to it. Isn't that the process of addiction? Isn't that the curse of true slavery, physical, financial, emotional, spiritual? The human being is unaware of the promise of another universe. The human being is unaware of the prospects of a different type of life. One does not even know that he or she is in exile. One does not even know that he or she is in a difficult condition, that they ought to crave redemption. Because the first step towards redemption is the frustration with exile. What happens in such a situation? Let's go now back to halacha. And the Rogatchover presents this, I must say, primarily in halachic terms, in Jewish legalistic terms. I am just using his ideas and also conveying these same legalistic terms from a spiritual or psychological perspective based on the discourses in Kabbalah and Hasidism concerning the issue of slavery and liberation in the internal life of the human being. As you know, in Judaism, the legal and the mystical are integrated in a seamless whole. So he discusses it from a legal perspective, but it also mirrors the psycho-spiritual dynamics within the human psyche and within the Jewish soul. What happens back to a legal servant who after 6 years doesn't want to leave? He wants to remain a slave. Who can understand that today? We live in a democracy. We live in the United States of America, or wherever you live. Many of you hopefully live in democracies. It's difficult for us to understand slavery. But we can understand it sometimes on a psychological level, on an emotional level. The servant wants to remain a slave. His ear is then pierced according to the Torah, and he remains there till Jubilee. But once Jubilee comes, he is also set free. As I said before, when Jubilee comes, the earth is set free. The earth, the farms and fields that were purchased by a buyer go back to their original owner, and the slaves that were owned by various owners go free. They set free. So what happens when the slave does not want to leave? We need Yovel, we need the Jubilee year. When we analyze what happens during the Jubilee year, we'll be able to come back here to Egypt and understand the dynamics that occur here from the perspective of the Rogatchover Gaon of the Tzafnas Paneach. The Gemara tells us in Masechta Baba Metzia Daf Kuf Tes Amud Aleph. The Gemara discusses the following legal case. If I lease a field from you, or I lease a home from you, for a certain amount of time, and I make improvements in the home, in the real estate, or in the field, if it's not explicitly stated in the contract that I have the right to do it and you will cover my expenses, when the lease is over, the field or the home goes back to the original owner, to the landlord, and all the improvements that I invested in the home or the field is his benefit. He never asked me to do it. He never instructed me to do it at his expense. I did it on my own while I was living there. The property is not mine. It was just rented for a year or 5 years or 20 years. It was leased. So when it goes back with all the benefits and improvements that the tenant has invested into the home or into the field. What happens, however, if I purchase a home or I purchase a field? I don't only lease it for a certain amount of years, I purchase it absolutely and unequivocally. There is no question that even if at some point the buyer, the original owner, will buy it back, the improvements that I put in are mine. So either I will sell the home for a larger value because of the improvements, or if I sell it back for the same amount or just a little more, he'll have to cover the improvements. Why? Because I did it in my own territory. So here is the question the Talmud discusses. When you sell a field in the time of the Jubilee, it's only 50 years. After 50 years, it goes back. Yet the halacha is that the improvements belong to the buyer, not to the original owner. So the question is why it was only leased for 50 years. So the Gemara answers, Yovel zvini ma'al yehu, ela yovel afkata de malka. When I sell a field to my colleague, my friend, even though it may be only for 50 years, the sale is a good sale. Legally, it's a complete sale, no strings attached. It becomes yours. And therefore, when you improve the home, you're improving your property. You're not improving my property. It's your property that you're improving. It's your field that you're improving. Therefore, after 50 years, it goes back to me. You are the one who gains. You are the one who gains from the benefits. I have to cover the expenses of the improvements. You don't lose from it. I was only leased for 50 years. The Gemara says it's not a lease. It's a good sale. Afkata de Malko. It's just that in the 50th year, the king, the creator of the world, Hashem, relinquishes your ownership from it. He takes it away from you. It's not that the sale wasn't a good sale. The sale was an unequivocally good sale. It was an eternal sale. The creator of the world who owns the whole world then comes and relinquishes the field from the human being, and therefore the benefits and improvements he does not relinquish. The benefits and improvements belong to you, and you ought not to lose money for the extra improvements that you invested in this field that he, the owner, will now gain from it. It goes a step further. The Gemara learns out from the pasuk Va'aretz lo yisimacher litzmisus. The earth should not be sold for eternity. Ki kol haaretz, because it belongs to me, and on the 50th year it goes back. The Gemara says that the only way the laws of Jubilee apply is if a piece of land is sold for eternity. Say I sell you my field for 60 years. Jubilee will not restore that field to me. If I sell you the field without a time estimate, if I just sell you the field and it's yours, then Jubilee year brings it back to me. If I sell it for 60 years or 40 years or 70 years, in other words, essentially it's like a lease. It doesn't totally belong to you because one day it's going to come back to me. You only have the right to use it for 30, 40, 50, 60, 70 years. So it's not totally yours. Then the law of Jubilee, which liberates the land and gives it back to me, doesn't apply. So we have here an interesting paradox. If I sell you the field completely, in other words, litzmisus forever, so it's really yours. Now the Jubilee year will take it away from you and give it back to me. But if I don't sell it completely to you, I only lease it to you, you have a right to use it for a few decades. You have a right to use it for 60, 70 years. Then the laws of Jubilee will not relinquish it from you because it was not totally yours. And since it was not totally yours, it never really belonged to you. So then you can actually keep it till the lease is over, till the 60 years is up, till the 7 year is up. So the Rogatchover explains, what does this mean? What this means is the power of Jubilee to relinquish land is only when the very essence of the property belongs to the buyer. When the very essence of the property belongs to the buyer, no strings attached, then the creator of the world in the Jubilee year dictates that this ownership is relinquished, the field is taken away from the buyer and given back to the original owner who sold it who knows when. But if the buyer does not have complete ownership over the field, if the very essence and substance of the property doesn't really belong to him, it belongs to the original owner, so there is no power of Yovel. There is no authority to Jubilee year to come and take away that land from the buyer and relinquish his ownership. Yovel does not have the power to do it because anyway he doesn't really own the essence, the very substance, the core of that real estate. It's only leased for 60, 70 years, so Jubilee doesn't take it away. Comes the Rogatchover and says, the same is true concerning a servant. When a servant who chooses to remain by his master goes free in the year of Jubilee, the reason he goes free in the year of Jubilee is because he's kanui kinyan haguf. His very identity has been acquired by the master. His very self, his very humanness is working for somebody else. He's a full-time employee. True, he must be treated well and respectfully, and if you buy a slave, it's like buying a master, etc., as we discussed before. But nonetheless, his very self, his very substance, belongs to the owner. So when the year of Yovel comes, the real owner, the creator of the world who owns all of humanity and who owns every individual, takes away this slave from the owner, sets him free. He can go live his own life as an independent human being. What happens, however, if the ownership would not be a real ownership, just like in real estate, in the previous example? The very substance is not acquired by him, it's just leased for 60 years, he has the right to use it. The laws of Jubilee would not apply to this situation. So what happens when this servant is not totally acquired by the master? He would not be set free during Jubilee. Comes the Rogatchover and says, as long as the Jewish people did not express their desire to remain in Egypt, essentially 6 years was the limit, cut-off time, and they have to be set free. Once they express their desire to become avadim, to become slaves, now we need the power of Jubilee to liberate them. What is the power of Jubilee? God, the creator of the world. The true owner relinquishes the ownership of a master at some point and lets the servant set free. When can that apply? Only when the very substance of the servant belongs to the owner. Therefore, Parai subconsciously was guided to decree that even straw can't be given to them. At this point, the level of their servitude was elevated a profound notch. Now let's understand this psychologically or emotionally or spiritually. What this means is this. For a person to truly be liberated through the power of God, for a person to truly be set free through the assistance of the creator of the world, one must truly feel that they don't have another exit in life. The moment a person feels that they're not totally enslaved, they're not totally addicted, the moment they still believe that they can set themselves free because their essence is still liberated, they will not find freedom. They will continue to slave away because they believe they have an exit door. They believe they have another exit. Only when the person comes to realize that he has no other path, only when the person realizes that he has to really surrender his very identity to God, then he can truly be set free. So as long as I don't feel that my very identity is enslaved, as long as I feel it's a habit, it's an instinct, it's a quality, it's an emotion, but my very self is set free, God can't liberate you. Because my ego will not allow that. My denial will not allow it. Those who are confronted with addictions, those who have loved ones who are confronted with addiction, often learn this truth under very difficult circumstances. Namely, we love to deny that we are slaves. We love to say, I'm not completely a slave, it's only half, it's only 3/4. I'm not completely addicted. I don't really have the problem. I'm only leased for 60, 70 years. I'm only leased. I'm not really acquired by anybody else. God cannot set you free then. Only when the Eved becomes totally meshubad, only when the Eved has no identity of his own and he surrenders and he says, get me out of my mess, my God, can you become free. As long as the Jewish people can tolerate Egypt, they were not capable of the experience of Yovel, of a divine liberation. Hashem tells Moshe, tell the Jews, I will take you out from the burdens of Egypt. Sivlois in Hebrew means burdens. It also means something else. Sevel means to contain. Lizbol. In Hebrew, modern Hebrew, we have savlanut, patience. Lizbol. According to this Vasemis means, I will liberate you from tolerating Egypt. Sivlois Mitzrayim, from containing, from tolerating, from having patience for Egypt. As long as you can tolerate Egypt, you can't be set free. When Paroi took away the straw from the Jewish people, when they were now slaving away day and night, they didn't even get the dignity of having the straw with which they can then build the bricks, to build his cities of Pisim and Ramses. When they lost their whole identity, consumed totally by the burden of Paroi, here the slave suddenly realizes he's a slave. Here the slave suddenly realizes he must free himself. Here the slave suddenly realizes that he has to surrender. He's totally lost. Now, he opened the window. He pierced through the veil. He suspended the ego. The vanity is not there. Now the light can pierce through. Now his soul can emerge. Now God can speak to him. Now he can leave Egypt. According to this, we understand why the Torah tells us twice that the Jews did not respond to Moshe Rabbeinu. One at the end of Shmois and one in Vayera. Zog the Gemara in Kiddushin, and the Rambam brings in Hilchos Avodim, V'im Omar Yoimar HaEved At Sheyoima V'yishna. For a slave to remain after 6 years in the home of his master till Jubilee, he must state his desire twice. If he just says once, I love my master, I don't want to leave, doesn't suffice. V'im Omar Yoimar HaEved. The Eved has to say it twice. At Sheyoimar V'yishna, must say twice, I'm really here. Because if he said it once, we say, no, it was a moment. If he says it twice, he's sober, this is where he is, then we know this is where he is, and he remains there. So the fact that the Torah says once the Jews did not respond, they said we don't want to leave, that's not enough. V'imamar yoimar eved, it was twice. Now the situation truly became difficult. Now there was a crisis. Now they were really slaves. The true curse of slavery is when you can't imagine freedom. You can't imagine another life. You're so stuck within yourself, you don't know there are other prospects. And this is so true about all areas of life. This is true about people's crises in relationships, in their marriages, in their relationships with other people. The challenge is not to have a challenge. The challenge is when you have a challenge and you don't realize that there is another world. You don't realize that the sun can shine in your life When you become so accustomed to the darkness, you don't even know it's darkness. When you believe that misery is the natural state of existence, misery in your soul and misery in your relationships. That's the real exile. You should understand that tolerating Egypt is a problem. Here begins the redemption. So when they said it twice, now they were stuck. So Moshe comes to Hashem and says, Hein b'nei Yisrael shamu alai v'yechi shmeini parai. The Jewish people could not listen to me. How will Parai listen to me? So we asked before, what's the connection? The connection is now obvious. What he's saying is the Jewish people don't want to leave. How will I convince Parai to let them go? He might let them go. They don't want to leave. This is what happens. You have your food. You learned how to survive. This is nature. This is what I'm accustomed to. This is what so many people live with. Status quo of abuse, status quo of self-abuse, of self-humiliation, or living with other people's humiliation. They don't know there's anything else. Ahafti Adoni, I love my master. Powerful words. I don't know there's another love. How will Parai listen to me? The Jews don't want to leave. Parai will say, go, go, go. And they'll say, no, you're good. This is good. Furthermore, you'll relearn Chumash further throughout the 40-year journey in the desert. Every Monday and Thursday, they want to go back. A crisis emerges, they want to go back to Egypt. Why? This is the natural pattern in psychological terms of an addict. Even when the addict sets himself free, even when the addict sets herself free, and you liberate yourself, the moment you come to a difficult juncture in life, pressure, stress, something overwhelming, the addiction invites you back. Come back to Egypt. At least with me, you knew what to expect. I am familiar territory. Don't go explore a new desert. Don't go explore a barren life. No environment, no shelter. At least with the addiction, you were destroying yourself. But you knew what to expect. There were no surprises. This is a very powerful voice in human life. How can Parai listen to me when the Jews are not ready to listen to me? So what does Hashem say? Hashem tells Moshe, speak to the Jewish people. He sends Moshe and Aaron, Vayitzavim el bnei Yisrael, give a mitzvah to the Jew. And what will the mitzvah be? The mitzvah will be, you must set your servants free. And here we go back to the beginning. Imagine, he's speaking to people and he's telling them, not only is there freedom, one day there will be people working under you, for you. Set them free. And speak to Parai. And make sure he takes them out of Mitzrayim, and he makes a condition. You want to go out of Mitzrayim? You must make a commitment to set your slaves free. It's not only that he elevated their imagination, he spoke to them about another life, and he spoke to them about another world, and he spoke to them about a day that they will not only be free, but a day in which they will have the dignity to give other people dignity. There is something much deeper here, according to the Tzafnas Paneach, and it goes like this. We spoke earlier and said that true liberation could only come from God. And thus, for it to happen, sometimes the human being must hit rock bottom, unfortunately. Because as long as he does not realize that he will not liberate himself